Okay, welcome back to the second episode of Midnight Encounters. We have two stories today about Wendigo, which are people who were us, like you and me, poisoned by greed, gluttony, then turned into a pale, gaunt creature with sunken eyes, reached limbs, and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Always hungry, the Wendigo searches constantly for its next meal. The truth, however, it is much worse. Okay, let's go for our first story. When I was young, I often spent parts of the summers with my grandmother in her home, out in the county. It's my favorite place in the world. I always look forward to the week-long stays of gardening, baking, late-night fires, and s'mores and ghost stories, and enjoying having grandmother all to myself. There was a pond not far from her house, where I would sometimes go swim. It was home to quite a few frogs, and at night they made the most weirdest noises. I complained to my grandmother only once, saying I couldn't enjoy the night's breeze with all that racket. She took me on her lap and told me stories about an old woman who used to live near the lake. The old man couldn't stand the stinging of the frogs, but when his wife told him that they kept the Wendigo away, and to harm them would be unwise, well, he didn't listen, and set about methodically catching all the frogs in the lake. It was a process that took some time, but he did not stop until he had rid of the lake of the pesky amphibians. That night, without the protection of the frogs, his and his wife were slaughtered by the Wendigo, a vicious, whip-like demon creature with elongated fingers ending in sharp talons, a row of silver teeth, and as thin and as keen as needles. I wrote it off as another of her ghost stories, though she seemed more serious than usual about it. I never complained about the frogs again, mostly because I grew to enjoy them, but the story out of my mind. In fact, I'd forgotten about it until it came up in the past spring in a Native American literature class I was taking in college. The mention of Wendigo sparked that old memory of my grandmother's story. I thought she had made up the word. I didn't realize that there are stories about it originating in the Algonquin legends. Eager to connect something to my childhood to the topic, I googled it, only to find that my grandmother had apparently been mistaken. There is nothing I could find about the story she had told me, nor any references of the frogs providing protection of the Wendigo. In fact, the Wendigo legend seems very like my grandmother's version. They're said to be craving human flesh and sometimes creating a form of people who have resorted to cannibalism to survive. Description vary, but they sound like almost nothing like my grandmother's boogeyman version. I actually chuckled as I read it, almost a bit embarrassed in how badly my grandmother had messed up the original tale. I changed residences this summer, moved to a newly built 1,000 square foot on each side duplex in the edge of town. The other side is being occupied by my landlady, who has a place to build, who had the place built. However, she isn't scheduled to move the rest of her stuff and begin living in there for a couple weeks. She was waiting for her lease to end. Even though my new place is only a few minutes from the edge of town, it feels much more isolated. I enjoy the seclusion of my new home and its proximity to a more natural setting. I'm surrounded by woods, and from my patio I can see the pond beyond the carefully landscaped lawn, which is carved out from the surrounding woodlands. Just like the pond near my grandmother's house, the frogs have put up a furious racket lately. I prefer not to pay to run my air conditioning if I can help it, so I have every window open to catch a breeze. That means I can hear them as clearly if they're standing on the water's edge. It took a few days to get used to the noise, but I'm fine now, just like I was those summers when I was young. And in fact, the noises have been comforting to me during the stress of the move. Tonight is different. I find myself standing in my living room, staring at where the pond is, though I cannot see in the dark. The air is eerily still and oppressively warm, but all my windows are shut. I feel impossibly cold. I've long since convinced myself that my grandmother's story has been a silly tale, a twisted of an old legend by irrelevant storytellers, but for some reason, I have the most overwhelming sense of dread growing in a pit of my stomach. I don't know what to do. I'm trapped. Leaving my house means braving the darkness beyond my home. I don't know if I'm going to be safe here either. The frogs have stopped singing. And we're going to go straight to the next one. My name is Charles Keeper, and I was an investigative reporter for the local paper in Wisconsin. If that sounds impressive, then you have the completely wrong idea about my career. Mostly they sent me out to the middle of nowhere to investigate supernatural events and creatures. Half the people I've talked to were pulling their bullshit stories out of their ass, and the other half were hopelessly deluded. Not exactly a perfect job, but hey, whatever puts food on the table, right? Well, my last investigation brought me to a small town nestled deep in the northern forest of Wisconsin. So, the curious among you do not seek out in this town. I'll omit its name. Trust me, it's for your own good. In any case, the remote settlement made a small buzz after a young man living with his mother reported two grisly murderers. One he committed himself, and another he claimed that he was the work of the Wendigo. The man, who I shall call Robert, told the authorities he heard a scream while hunting one evening. Following the noise down one game trail, he found his neighbor half eaten, with a skeletal white creature stood over him covered in blood and gore. Robert shot several rounds at the creature and then burned his body. The body of the Wendigo was later identified as that of a man who has gone missing almost 15 years prior. Robert never stood trial. To get a closer look at the full story, I met Robert at his home. I realized it might not be the smartest idea to visit a confessed murderer on his own property. However, I made it certain to his mother his mother would join us. Even a crazed killer would not hurt an innocent reporter in front of his mother. Or so I told myself anyway. Their home was a shack, battered and broken by time. Dust fogged the windows, weeds strangled the rickety porch. The front, where Robert waited eagerly for me, hung at an angle, swung to an even, gentlest breeze. "You're here," Robert said. He sounded surprised, but pleasantly so. His lips curled into a wide, yellow-toothed smile, and then faltered, falling to a gloomy frown. We shook hands and headed to the living room to talk. The room smelled of spilled beer and old deli meat. Robert invited me to sit on the couch, no doubt of the source of the dizzily stench. I did not plan on staying for long. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," I said. "I know what you went through must have been difficult, so I won't pry too deep, but please, if you would recount that day for me as much detail as you're comfortable with, our readers are eager to hear the truth." Robert shrugged. "Ain't nothing. People deserve the truth, even if it's hard to hear." I couldn't agree more, I said, forced to smile. "Truth be told, I'm just happy someone who wants to hear my story," he said. "The newspapers, you read them? They're making me out as some lunatic killer." "Well, I work for the newspaper," I said. "But we're dedicated to all sides of the story. That includes your side. So, whenever you're ready." I pulled out a notebook and pen. Scratching his head, Robert glanced up to the side, his brow scrunched together as he struggled to recall a story. Real or fake? I didn't know or care. After some time, Robert shrugged again. "Nothing special about that day," he said. "I went out hunting, and there's some game trails back through the woods there. Didn't find nothing, of course, and the night came all quick like, so I was just heading home. And then that's when you found your neighbor and the..." He nodded. "Wasn't 3 yards from the backyard, if you can believe it." I couldn't. At first, I didn't see nothing. Like I said, night came all quick, like clouds all across the sky. Nothing like a moon or a star to see. But I heard it. He made an unsettling sound like a dog gnawing on bone. Then down the path I shone my flashlight. I see it. And Kev. "Kev is your neighbor?" He nodded. "And the creature?" "The Wendigo," he corrected him. "Yes, the Wendigo. What did it look like?" I asked. "It was a tall, with long white limbs. Its skin was stretched thin, as if I didn't fit its bones, and its eyes were sunken in, you know, like big black pits. They were cold, dead. Nothing there but hunger and hate." His brow pinched together and his mouth fell open. Blood, too. Blood everywhere. On its arms, on its face, on its chest. And there's Kevis. He cleared his throat and muttered something under his breath. I didn't catch it. God bless him. He was just torn to shreds. And that beast, the Wendigo, still had bites of him in his teeth. Well, I got my Ruger, and I pumped 5 shots in it, no hesitation. "You and Kev were close?" "Good guy. We hunt together on occasions. Ma said we went looking for me in the evening. Wanted to ask me something. Now, I'll never know what, Robert said. Stared into the distance and said nothing. He was beginning to wonder what his mother was. So far, she hasn't made an appearance, and the longer the silence lingered, the more uncomfortable I felt. Eventually, I made Kurt cough, and there was 5 shots. Did they kill the creature? Seems so. How'd it sound muffled and fell to the ground, Robert said. But I didn't take no chances. I knew what it was as soon as I saw it, and I knew the legends. Only fire can kill Wendigo. So I ran back home, got some gasoline, and lit that fucker up. His face spread into a proud smile. I said. The police identified the Wendigo as... Yeah, I know, Robert interrupted. But I didn't know him. You think it was this man or something else? I asked. Robert shrugged. Could be. They said the Wendigo used to be a human. A small, shriveled woman shuffled into the living room. Ain't no human, she said in a harsh, combative tone. Ma, Robert said. I told you before, she said. Wendigo just means evil spirit, ain't got no human. I told you before, Robbie. You think it's a spirit? I asked his mother. I do, she said. You know how many people have gone missing over this past 50 years? 5. Christ. We only had 100 people in this town. Something ain't right with that forest. It ain't natural. You want my advice? Don't go near it. I chuckled. Funny you should say that. I was just about to ask you if you show me where you found the Wendigo. I could show you where the game trail starts, Robert said. But even I won't go down that way again. You're not thinking of looking around, are you? His eyes twinkled with a genuine concern. Robert may have been a murderer, but I could tell he truly believed the story he told me. I pitied him. You already killed the Wendigo? What do I have to fear? I said. The wrinkled old woman scowled. Don't you go looking for trouble, she said. Because you'll find it, and you'll be sorry. A good reporter would follow up on the story with the police. If Robert's mother was right, the town had too many missing people than could be explained. But I am not a good reporter. I wanted to go home. It didn't matter whether or not I got to the bottom of the story. My readers would still eat the garbage up anyways. So I went out to the woods looking for more Wendigos. One night in the forest, I called the story finished. It's not like I expected to find anything. The forest was a forest. Once you've seen one, you've seen them all. Dead. Brown leaves blanketed the floor while reaching. Black branches blinded the sky, and through the woods ran a winding dirt path where Robert used to hunt. After walking up and down the trail for an hour, a starless, moonless night has cast everything into shadow, so I made camp for the night. I set up a tent and lit a small fire to keep me warm. Once the flames grew tall and bright, I pulled out my notebook. Late this evening, I heard strange noises, I wrote. Rustling trees, muffled chatter, a shadow shifted among the silhouetted trees. It could have been a person or an animal. But with the hair on my neck stood straight up, I didn't feel safe. None of it was true. I hadn't experienced anything about outside the forest, usual sights and sounds. That fire crackled. I sighed. I was tired of spending nights alone in the forest, making up all the stories about the fictional creatures. There were so much better ways to spend one time and make one's money. I was still young. Maybe I could switch newspapers and write something real for a change. I heard another crack, then another, and this time the heaven came from the fire. I squinted to the dark forest. It has to be some kind of animal. All sorts of them came out at night to forage. Possums, raccoons, skunks, and so on. But as I searched into the woods, I saw the branches bent and snap. And the animal was large. A coyote, perhaps? What else could it be? Leaves rustled. The sound was close. Whatever it was approaching the fire. I looked long and hard for the source of noise. As soon as I saw the inky shadow pass from tree to tree. "Robert," asked the dark figure, "is that you?" With no answer. "Robert." Nothing. Now, I was growing afraid. Against all logic, I entertained the possibility that maybe Robert and his mother were right. Maybe there were such things as Wendigos and evil spirits. God, I hope not. Just in case, I grabbed a log and lit one end on fire. Robert said the only fire can kill a Wendigo. It was probably bullshit. But better safe than sorry. Before long, the noises stopped. I waited and listened with the flaming log in hand. Minutes passed, one after another, but the forest was silent. After several bated breaths, I relaxed. The campfire, which I have all but forgotten about, has burned down to its last embers. The dark coal smolders faintly, so I placed my makeshift weapon on top and tried to coax the fire back to life. Just then I heard the crunch of a leaf close behind me. I whirled around, but there was nothing, only my tent trembling slightly in the cold breeze. I built the fire into a great blaze, whose heat and light gave me strength. For hours I watched the flames dance and listened for any noise, big or small. Thankfully I heard nothing, and by the time the fire finally died, I was exhausted but calm. With my fears behind me, I headed to my tent to rest. It was then I saw it for the first time. The Wendigo. Its face. Not at all human. It was pallid skull, adorned with gnarled black antlers. To fit inside the tent, the towering creature hunched over its limbs. But its body was not pale or emaciated, as Robert has described. At one look, it was solid, black flesh with muscles wide and bulging, and at the next, it was a gossamer fog. However, I didn't get to go look at it but too long before it knocked me out cold with a swipe to the hand. I woke up in a dingy cave with a ragging headache and a chill run down my spine. I was naked, bound to a rock slab, and utterly terrified. Besides me, there was 2 other slabs, each with a pale, naked body on them. Even in the dark, I could see the curves of their bones pressing so tight against their skin, I thought it might burst. They were dead. They had to be. Yet, when I called out for help, the 2 bodies stirred silently as if I'm waking them from sleep. You're alive. Oh God, oh thank God, I said. Where are we? How long have you been here? What's happening? For all my questions, I only received ancient grunts and groans in response. The two people craned their necks to look at me. When I saw their faces, I shrieked in horror. They weren't people. Not anymore. Their eyes have receded to their skull. Their teeth have narrowed to beastly points. Bloody sores spotted their hairless scalps, and scars marked their gaunt cheeks. When they looked at me, their gashed their teeth and licked their tattered lips. I had no doubts Robert has seen one of these creatures, but why were they tied up? And what was the creature I saw in my tent? I don't know. All three stone slabs faced a long, gaping tunnel that stabbed deep into the hillside, far from the tuft of light. I strained to see its end, yet I could see nothing. And as I looked deeper into the tunnel, I saw a white skull and black antlers emerge slightly. Hey, I said. Who are you? What do you want? The creature's eyes eyed me with a hollow stare and then sunk back into the darkness. My heart raced into my chest as I struggled against my restraints, but as they would not budge. I felt around for something that could help me escape, but the ropes pressed down on my wrist. I could only reach fruitlessly with the tip of my fingers. No, I muttered with a shrill, frantic voice. No, please help me, help. My breath grew short and shallow until my lungs trembled. No matter how hard I gasped, I could not get enough air. Soon my vision spun and went black. When next I woke up, I found my captor seated on a rock, though it had no eyes to blink. The creature was staring at me. What do you want? I asked. It cocked its head one side but said nothing. You aren't human. What are you? A ghost? A spirit? The creature crumbled low on its throat. A spirit? Is that it? The creature murmured in a deep, guttural voice. Whatever words it spoke, it was no longer a language I have heard before. A demon? A Wendigo or something? Wendigo, I said in a menacing tone. The Wendigo stood and approached me. It lowered its hand towards my bare chest and then growled. Then, pulling its hand back, the Wendigo turned and walked towards the next captive. The pale breast on the table was already squirming with anticipation. What do you want? I asked again. The creature spoke several words in a foreign tongue. I don't understand, I said. Food. Must. Starve, I said as it scanned. It said as it scanned the captive, widowly body. I have no idea what that meant, but I didn't like the sound of it. I hurled another barrage of questions at the Wendigo, but this time it ignored me. From out of thin air, the Wendigo produced a short steel knife. Without hesitation, he pressed the keen blade against the captive's sickly white skin. The beast wailed in pain as the Wendigo shaved off a sliver of skin. But when the deed was done, the bony creature raised its head. Mouth agape, it stretched towards the slice of flesh like a flower to the sun. Then, chanting, the Wendigo fed its prisoner. In an instant, the mangled strip of skin was gone, consumed without a second thought. But the chance continued for several moments more, and when it finally ended, the pale beast began to whisper. It shrank into itself and trembled visibly. Delighting in its fear, the Wendigo chuckled. Then, after a long, disturbingly silent moment, the Wendigo thrust its hand into the beast's stomach. Soon, the cave filled with its victim's shriek of horror and pain, and the Wendigo's moan of pleasure. I closed my eyes, too scared to watch. Several minutes passed by before the screams finally died down. I cracked open my eyes. Somehow the pale creature's stomach was untouched. Even so, it continued to writhe on the slab, traumatized in agony. As for the Wendigo, it has moved to the next victim. Cruel laughter rumbled low in the cave, accidented by a shrill whimpers of the imprisoned. The ritual was about to begin again. I heard the cry of steel, and of pain, and of pleasure, organs squish and groaned. Blood sloshed and spilled. All the while I wondered if it would be my turn to suffer under the Wendigo's touch. However, when the Wendigo was finished, it merely turned and disappeared down the tunnel. It was not yet my time. Time, they say, is relative, and in the cave no light to signal the day. It could have been days, weeks, or even months I could stay strapped to that stone. Hunger gnawed at my belly, aching worse than anything I felt before. At times I caught the Wendigo watching me from the shadows as if waiting for something. But he didn't say or do anything. He continued to torture the other prisoners, but not me. After that, he returned to the tunnel and disappeared for hours on end. With the Wendigo gone, I searched for a way to free myself, but I could think of nothing. One day I heard the wind howl from somewhere behind me. Another day I heard rain patter gently against stone. The exit couldn't have been too far away, but too far from reach. In time, the pain of starvation became so unbearable that I could think of only food. I even chewed off the dry flakes of my lips in desperate attempt to fill my belly. But I didn't even touch my hunger. God, I would have eaten anything if you put it in front of me. Of course, this is exactly what the Wendigo was waiting for. Food must starve, as it has said. It didn't take long to figure out what this meant. I have watched the Wendigo enough to know it wasn't torturing each other prisoners. It was feeding off their pain, their starvation, their hunger. When the Wendigo stood before me one day, I knew it was time. I have starved enough. My heart quaked when I felt the Wendigo's short steel blade, but I suffered the pain with pride. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. The Wendigo had not broke me yet, and when my flesh was forced in my mouth, I spit it back out as a cruel spirit. However, the Wendigo did not care. It hacked off another chunk of meat, grabbed my jaw in a firm grip, and shoved the flesh down my throat. As I swallowed my pride and a flesh bath, the Wendigo muttered its demonic tongue, and the words meant nothing to me. Even so, I felt a strange sensation steep into my veins, as if my achy, unrelenting hunger has expanded out of my stomach and the rest of my body. While I pondered what was happening to me, the Wendigo forced its hands into my abdomen, its fingers sobbing as they wrapped around my stomach, twisting it and tearing it open. My entrails surrendered to the Wendigo, bursting under its strong grip. The pain was unimaginable. I roared in agony while the Wendigo moaned in delight. No man or woman shall have to endure what I did. Worse than the pain and the Wendigo's pleasure was the knowledge. It could do nothing to stop it. It was helpless. Not just then, but for years, I thought it would grow accustomed to the torture, resigned myself to it. But pain is a funny thing. When you feel it intense enough and often enough, you don't grow numb to it. You grow more sensitive. It traumatizes you. Every moment of every year, every moment of every day, you fear it, scared and helpless. That's what I was for so many years. You may wonder how I survived so long on just meager scraps carved from my body. The Wendigo did something to me and the others. Call it a spell or a curse or whatever you want, but I survived. I survived and I starved, so the Wendigo could feed for years to come. What was that creature did? It changed me, slowly, almost without notice. I became like the other prisoners. My hair fell out, my eyes sank into my skull, and my skin drained of all color. Even my thoughts had started to disappear, consumed by irresistible, insatiable hunger. I could only cling desperately to my humanity. I forced myself to recall my favorite songs, my hobbies, and my family faces, but all fading so fast. Soon, I knew, there would be nothing. What's more, I heard things. Deep within the lightless tunnel, thin, ghostly voices murmured and growled. I caught only the echo of their words, but it was enough to convince me that I have gone truly mad. Regardless, I did escape that cave eventually. That fateful day began not with my freedom, however, but with the freedom of another. Sometime after feeding, the Wendigo had returned to the tunnel. One of the prisoners rose from its slab with a jagged rock in hand. It walked to the center of the cave and looked at the path behind me, where a soft wind murmured. I could barely believe it. Of course, it was possible, after all. Robert had seen and killed one of these creatures. But how many years has it been there? How many years has it been there? Yeah, how many years I have been there? How many years has it been there? If there's hope for that poor beast, then maybe there's hope for me. Maybe it would even let me go. As the pale creature walked past me towards the exit, I opened my mouth and called for its attention. Nothing came out but a dry croak. After all those years without speech, my body barely remembered how to do it. I poured all my strength to my throat and tried again. Please, was all I could muster. It was enough. The creature turned around and approached my slab. Some humanity lingered in the beast after all. It understood me. It pitied me. It would help me, or so I thought. Still clenching the pointed rock, it looked down at me. For once, I could see its eyes clearly. They were utterly black. Its pupils have expanded until they consumed the entire cornea. Inside, I could see nothing. No thought, no emotion, only hunger. Mouth ajar, and the beast grabbed my arm and lifted the rock. All I could do was scream. Then suddenly, the Wendigo caught the creature's wrist. Without a word, the Wendigo dragged its prisoner back to the slab, desperate to escape. The creature thrashed at its captor. It clawed and scraped a little bit, to no avail. The Wendigo took the abuse without any complaint. In the last ditch of effort to free itself, the creature grabbed one of its Wendigo antlers and pulled it with all of its might. A short, twisted chunk snapped off, making the Wendigo howl in pain. For an instant, the creature was free. However, it only managed to take a step before the Wendigo returned to its senses. With the back of its hand, the Wendigo struck his prisoner across the face. Keen, crooked teeth sprayed across the cave. They tinged across the cold stone like death bells ringing. Fueled by rage, the Wendigo thrust his hand through the creature's chest. Blood spattered all over the prisoner beside me, who licked up the hot liquid without remorse. Now, one prisoner short, the Wendigo sighed and muttered something to it in a ancient tongue. Then it grabbed the bloody corpse and dragged it into the tunnel. Halfway down, before disappearing from sight, the Wendigo stopped and looked back at me. A shiver ran down my spine. I clutched my fists tightly. In one of them was a tooth that felt like a miracle into my hand. I prayed to any god that would listen to let that miracle be taken, to not let that miracle be taken away. And perhaps one of them heard me, because the Wendigo turned around and sank into the darkness. Uncertain how long the Wendigo absence would last, I waited. The tooth would be my keyhole, but I hadn't had to be smart as I expected. The Wendigo returned shortly. It was not let the slab sit empty, so it slipped past me into the free world, where it would soon find another victim. After several anxious minutes, I began my work. The tooth I had received was a molar. It wasn't sharp enough to cut rope, so I rubbed it against the stone slab. It took hours to narrow the tooth to a razor-like point, and just as I began to saw through my rope lines, I heard the rustle of a cloth against the cave floor. It was a Wendigo dragging its prey. This time it was a girl, blonde, in her mid-20s, I guess. The Wendigo laid her against the slab and disrobed her. She was pretty. At one time I may have looked at her with a pleasure and desire, but at the time all I could think was how hungry I was. I held onto the sharpened tooth for another week or so, hiding it when necessary. Truth be told, I was too terrified to free myself. If I got caught, that was it. No more miracles. I would be stuck in that cave forever. I needed a distraction. One day the Wendigo carved a sliver of flesh from my thigh. A thin beam of light penetrated our chamber. A light was weak, as if the sun came from somewhere far off, but it might have well been the noontime sun. I haven't seen light in decades. Although the light flickered and slipped away, the sound of footsteps echoed through the cave. As soon as I heard the sound, the Wendigo dropped his knife and vanished into the tunnel. What it feared I couldn't say. Your guess is as good as mine. But it was an opportunity, and I took it. Frantically dug the tooth into my rope binds. Long after the footsteps, I heard voices of three men calling out for someone. I didn't know the girl's name, but I could only assume that they were looking for her. The ray of light flashed our way again, this time wider and stronger. I glanced at the girl. She struggled against her own binds, but no avail. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Starvation has drained all of her energy. She was helpless, just as I had been so many times before. Not this time. This time I would be free. I hacked through my restraints even as the men's voice faded along with the thin, shifting light. Knees wobbly, I pushed myself to my feet. I gave one last look at the depthless black tunnel as I left quickly as my legs would allow. The whole time I wondered if the Wendigo would drag me back to the slab or kill me, as it did with the other prisoner. However, luck shone on me that day. After several minutes of raggedy breath and throbbing anxiety, I stumbled through the mouth of the cave into freedom from the man that I had not seen light in years. The moon and stars were blinding. As though I shielded my eyes from them, their presence gave me hope and comfort. Gaunt and naked, I ran through the woods in search of civilization. At some point, I collapsed from exhaustion, but when I woke again, I returned to running, bound by fear and hunger. It was at midday when I found a dirt path that woven between the trees. I followed it when I came into contact with a young man on a hike. Naturally, his first response was to scream. "Please," I said. It's the only word I knew I could say. This time the hiker responded with kindness and concern. Despite the horrific transformation I've undergone, he could still tell I was a person, not just that I was starving and covered in cuts and scars. "I'm sorry," the man said. "Do you need help? How can I help?" I took a step closer. The man's cheeks were full, red with life, and along his neck ran a plump, juicy vein. I tried to speak, but this time only a hoarse grumble came out. "Water? Do you need water?" the man asked. He pulled out a plastic bottle from the bag strapped to his back. "Food," I said, took another step closer. My heart roared into my ears. Or perhaps this was his heart I heard, beating strong behind his thick, meaty chest. A shiver ran down my spine. The man pulled out a granola bar out of his backpack. "Here," he said. Then I reached forward to take it, but I didn't want granola, and I couldn't control myself. I tried. I swear I did. Yet, even with the Wendigo far behind me, the influence lingered. I swatted away from the granola bar and leapt at the man, scratching him across the neck. Blood coated my nails, and when I licked the dark drops, they tasted sweet as cream. Unbeknownst to me, the man had a knife. He stabbed me into my shoulder and cut me across the cheek. The pain was no worse than what I had felt every day in that cave. But I did not want to suffer any more. I let go off the man and retreated to a fetal position. Meanwhile, the man ran to the cops, I presume because sooner or later the group of police officers approached me with guns drawn. Not long after, I found myself in a cell, imprisoned again. At least this time I was clothed and fed. Of course, the police had questions, simple ones. For instance, "Who are you? Who took me?" It took me a second, but I remembered. Charles Keeper," I said. They ran the name through the database, and they came back with a photo. It was a photo of me. It looked so different, I barely recognized myself. Yet it was enough for the cops. "Jesus Christ," one of them said. "You've been missing for 15 years. 15? I repeated, like it's been 50. It felt like it's been 50. "What happened to you?" they asked. Their eyes studied me closely, never once letting up or looking away. I cowered into my knees, and I said nothing. When the silence dragged on too long, they held up another photo. "Do you know this girl?" It was a girl from the cave. I flinched at the sight of her. "You do, don't you?" I looked up. It hurt to meet their gaze, but I've met it anyways. "Please," I said. I don't want to think about her. I don't want to think about the Wendigo. Please, don't." "I can't." "Can't what?" one cop asked. By the color of his face and the volume of his voice, I could tell he was angry. "She's been missing for a week. Her parents are worried sick. They want to know what happened to her baby. And you cannot tell us?" You won't, I stuttered. We won't believe you?" another cop finished. I nodded. "Go on, try us. If you're to tell us where she is, maybe we'll forget about the man you assaulted in the forest," another cop added. I had no choice. They wouldn't let me leave until I told them, so I did. I told them everything. At times they caught me looking among each other, thinking no doubt that I had gone mad. But, on the whole, they were receptive. They tried to make reason of my story. Maybe the Wendigo was just a man in a costume. Maybe the trauma of the torture had altered my memories. In any case, 2 of the cops happened to be part of my search party that investigated the cave that night I escaped. Even though my story was a lie, it didn't matter so long as they found the missing girl in the cave. They asked me to help them find her. There are only simply too much tunnels in the cave for them to find her on her own. But I refused outright. Nothing would bring me back to the cave. The thought of it triggered such a severe panic attack that they let me go without another word. Since then, I have readjusted to life as the best I can, anyway. At first, food tasted sour, but for the most part, I have gotten used to it. I just take my steaks rare now. I found myself a lady, too. She's decent, sweet, and she helped me forget about the times I've suffered. She doesn't believe my story. I can sense it with the tone of her voice whenever the subject comes up, but she knows better than to tease me. As for Missing Girl, the police never told me if they found her. I have never heard anything from them since they released me. I hope they did find her. I really do. But in the many years that have passed, it never once occurred to me to find out. To tell you the truth, this is one story I do not want to see to the end. This is one story I do not want to see the end. And this was from creepypasta.com by Andrew Layden. Just to credit the people, the title of this one was Beware of the Wendigo on creepypasta.com. Just to bring it out there. Okay, well, thank you guys for listening in. Make sure to follow, rate this podcast. Yeah, I'll see you guys next Monday.